Hi, my name is Michael Cullen for Film Sound Tutorials, and welcome back to another video in my video series of a one-man workflow for post-film sound. And in this video, we're going to talk about reverb. So when you're adding reverb to your film, generally you're using it to add space or depth for two different reasons. Either to make the audio sound more realistic, or to make it sound larger than life. So in this tutorial, we're going to talk about how to use reverb for both use cases. Now, when I first set up my session many videos ago, I didn't add any tracks to add my reverb plugins to. So before we actually go over how to use reverb plugins, we need to set up aux tracks to add our reverb plugins to. Now, the way that I'm going to show you is a compromise between having a fast and efficient mixing process while trying to manage our computer resources. Because if you use too many reverb plugins, it'll start to bog down your whole session. So before adding aux tracks to our session, let's figure out what we might want to add reverbs to. So for dialogue, we might want to add reverb to the ADR, the group tracks, to make them better match the dialogue recorded on set, or we might want to add it to the production dialogue to make it better fit how the location looks in the visuals. We can also use reverb for sound effects. So generally, reverb is used when you're doing some kind of dream sequence, or if you're trying to make a sound effect sound larger than life, then a reverb is a good fit for sound effects. We also might need to use reverb for Foley. Same thing, to be able to match the Foley to the dialogue, we might have to dirty it up and add reverb to it to make it mesh with our dialogue track. Now for our backgrounds, I've never really needed to use reverb for our backgrounds, because when I was selecting backgrounds, I was ensuring that the backgrounds themselves already had the characteristic of wherever the location is. So for example, if we're in a large location, then of course I'm going to choose backgrounds that already sound fairly reverberant. So for backgrounds, I've never needed reverbs, so we're not going to add a reverb for those. And then lastly, for music, again, generally when I'm delivered music, it's already mixed. So generally, I don't need to add additional reverb to the music, but for this tutorial, I'm going to set it up as well. So I generally like to put my reverbs underneath my music VCA track. So I'm going to make 8 new aux tracks by doing Control-Shift-N, which is a shortcut for new tracks. And then I'm going to make 8 new stereo aux tracks. Great. So you can see here that it's placed my aux tracks underneath my music VCA and above my submasters. Now let me actually name them on how I'm going to use them. So for the first 2 aux tracks, I'm going to use them for the dialogue track. So I'm going to call this DX-Verb A, and then the next one DX-Verb B. So then for the following aux track, I'm going to put FX-Verb A, and you can kind of start seeing where this is going, FX-Verb B, and then Foley, Verb A, Foley, Verb B, and then finally Music, Verb A, and Music, Verb B. Great. And since these are aux tracks, we need to put them in solo safe mode so that you can hear them when tracks are soloed. So we need to use the special key command where we hold Control and then we click all of the solo buttons on these aux tracks. Okay, great. So before we add the reverb plugins, let's set up the busing of these aux tracks. So for the dialogue, we're going to send a new bus to it, and we can select any one we want. I'll just go with 11 and 12. For B, same thing. That needs its own bus, so 13, 14. Same for the effects. And I'll just speed this up so you don't have to watch me do it in real time. Same for the Foley. And last but not least, the music aux tracks as well. Great, and then like before, let's rename them by just hitting right click on the bus. And of course, we're going to call this DX-Verb A, DX-Verb B, FX-Verb A, FX-Verb B, Foley Verb A, Foley Verb B, and then last but not least, Music Verb A and Music Verb B. Okay, great. So now that we set up the input for these aux tracks, let's set up the output for the aux tracks. So the dialogue tracks are obviously going to go to our dialogue submaster. So that would be DX submaster here. The sound effects are going to the sound effects submaster. And if you select both of them and then hold Shift and Alt, you can actually edit the output of both of them at the same time. So effects submaster, Foley's going to Foley, Shift Alt, and then Foley submaster. And music is going to music, Shift Alt, music submaster. Okay, great. So we set up the inputs, we set out the outputs. Now we have to be able to actually send audio to these aux tracks. So let's scroll up all the way to our dialogue tracks. And like I said before, we're going to send the audio to those aux tracks. And so to do that, let's open up the edit window view selector by hitting the caret. And let's actually open up our sends column. So here is where all your sends go. So sends are just another way of busing audio to different tracks within your session. So in this instance, we want to send the dialogue to our DX verb A and to our DX verb B. And by default for sends is that they always start at -infinity, which is exactly what we want. And generally too, just to make sure I'm not sending anything, I also tend to mute them as well. Great, so now let's copy these sends onto every dialogue track. So I'm gonna do the verb A first, and to duplicate and elevator the plugin, you just have to hold Windows and Alt on your keyboard. Don't need it on the X track, and let's put it on our ADR as well. Just keep duplicating and elevatoring it down. And on our group track as well. And let's do the same thing for DX verb B as well. Okay, great. So now that we set up the dialogue track, let's go and do the same thing for our sound effects and our Foley. So for the send, I want to send it to the effect verb A. Same thing as before, I'm going to mute it. And we'll set up the verb B as well and mute it as well. And then duplicate and elevator them all the way down. And then same thing for verb B. Great, so that's sound effects. Let's move on to Foley. Same exact thing. Send it to the Foley verb A and mute it. Foley verb B and mute it. And then duplicate and elevator them down. And same thing with verb B. So then for backgrounds, we don't have any reverb, so there's no need to do that for backgrounds. And then last but not least, for our music, send it to music verb A and mute it. And music verb B and mute it. And duplicate and elevator them all the way down. All of our beautiful music tracks. And the same thing with verb B. Okay, great. So now that we set up the busing for our Reverb Aux tracks, let's actually add the Reverb plugin to the aux tracks. So on the A tracks, I'm going to add a short, small reverb. And then on the B tracks, I'm going to add a longer, large reverb. And I found that just 2 reverbs is all I need for most situations. So to add a reverb plugin to our aux track, let's go over to our inserts, multi-channel plugin, reverb, and then let's use the default D-Verb reverb in Pro Tools. Great. So for my verb A, I generally use a reverb that mimics a small room. So let's go into the presets, and I tend to like the medium room preset. Great. So what did that preset do? So there's a couple different settings within reverbs that you normally see. The most important one is generally the decay, which means how long does the reverb or the echo last after the dry signal. So for a smaller room, it makes sense that your decay is not going to be that long. So for this is 581 milliseconds, which makes sense for a small room. The next important thing for a reverb is your mix setting. So in the mix setting, you can control how much of that audio actually gets affected by the plugin. So since we have it at 100% wet, that means that 100% of the audio will be affected by the reverb plugin. Now, since we're using this reverb plugin on a send, you want to use it at 100%. Because when you're sending audio through a send, Pro Tools is actually making a duplicate copy of your original audio track. So this means that the original audio is going to the submaster, and then you're going to have this duplicate copy of audio coming through the aux track, going to the reverb plugin, and then also going to the submaster track. So in short, we keep the mix normally at 100% wet. A couple other important settings is the diffusion setting. So if you're in a small room, how much is that sound going to bounce off the different walls in the room? So if it's a small room, you're going to have a larger diffusion setting because it's going to bounce off the walls fairly often. For pre-delay, that means you can add a delay on when you want your reverb to start. So for a small room, you generally don't have a delay because the sound is going to be bouncing off the walls pretty quickly. And then the last two settings, we have a high cut filter and we have a low pass filter. So for audio in general, lower frequencies will travel further than higher frequencies. So if you're trying to mimic the reverberations of a room, it makes sense that high frequencies won't be echoed back to you. And so that's why we have a high frequency cut setting. And then because having too much low frequency sounds unnatural, that's why we have a low pass filter as well. Great, so that's an overview of the settings normally found in a reverb plugin. So for my Verb A, I'm going to use this medium room preset, and I'm going to duplicate and elevator this plugin to all of my other Verb A aux tracks. So we'll put it on the sound effects Verb A, the Foley Verb A, and the music Verb A. Great. Now for my Verb B, let's add the reverb plugin again by going Insert, Multi-Channel Plugin, Reverb, D-Verb, and then let's load up the preset Small Church. Great, and so you can see this has slightly different settings than the medium room preset, and it makes sense. So compared to our medium room preset, this small church preset has a much longer decay. The high frequency cut is much lower, so we're not receiving as many high frequencies in the echo. There's a lower diffusion because there's going to be less walls close to the dry signal. And there's a little delay because if it's a large room, you're not going to hear that echo immediately after the dry signal. Great, so I'm going to use small church for all of my Verb B aux tracks. So let's duplicate and elevator this large verb onto all of my Verb B tracks. Awesome. So now we've set up the busing for the verb tracks, and we've actually added the reverbs onto the different aux tracks. And I'm going to make the track size a little bit smaller. So I'm just going to select them all and then hold Shift-Alt to make them smaller. That way they don't take up as much space. Now let's actually send some audio through our reverbs. So let's scroll up to the dialogue channel, and towards the beginning of the film, we have a sequence with Murphy talking to Craig, who's on top of the building. And in this sequence, you can see Murphy talking on the street, and then we cut to Craig's perspective of looking at Murphy from the top of the building. So let me show you that sequence.
If you think about it, give you some free time, pick up some hobbies, you could tweet.
Now, when we are doing our dialogue edit, of course we chose the audio from the close perspective, which is great, except now that the camera's moved much farther away, we need to mimic that perspective and that depth in our dialogue mix. So to do this, I'm going to use our smaller reverb because I don't think it needs the larger reverb. And I'm going to first unmute the send by clicking right click and then clicking mute. And then I'm going to automate the level of the send so that the dry signal only goes to the reverb on this one single shot. So to do that, let's put this track into touch mode. And to actually show you my volume automation, I'm going to open up the caret and go to Verb A level just so you can see what I'm doing. Great. So now let's open up the fader of the send because we want to be automating the send. And then I'm going to raise the volume of the send to send dialogue to that reverb that we've already set up for that single shot.
Be a good thing, Craig, if you think about it. Give you some free time, pick up some hobbies. You could tweet.
Great. Okay, so you can see that I was a little early when I was doing the fading, so I'm just going to nudge this automation over to the right by hitting the period or the right caret button. And then it looks like I was a little too early on lowering it. Let's move this automation to the right as well. All right, so let's hear it again.
If you think about it, give you some free time, pick up some hobbies. You could tweet.
Great. So after listening to it again, it seemed like that cut was still a little too harsh. So I'm going to move this top automation point to the left so that I have a more gradual fade out on my send.
You could tweet.
Great. So that's essentially what we're looking for. So this is a good example on how you can use reverb to add depth and space to your mix, especially when you're trying to match the camera's position. So now let me show you another way of using reverb on our dialogue tracks. So later in the film, we have Murphy's locker room scene, and we can use some reverb on our group track to make the audio feel like it's actually happening within this reverberant locker room. So here's how it currently sounds. Great, so you can see that our group track is just too dry right now. And since we're in a pretty reverberant space, I think I'll actually add the verb be this time to give it that more echoey feeling. So to do that, let's unmute the verb be send, and then let's put this into touch mode. And then let's open up the send fader so we can control the amount of audio we're sending to that reverb. And let's actually see how much reverb we want. Awesome. So it seems like right around 0 is what I'm looking for. And since I know that this group track is going to go through the entire scene, I can actually just copy this automation for that entire scene. So to do that, let's open up the automation level for our verb be send. And then I can just nudge these automation points to the left. And you can do a fast nudge by holding M on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side, you can hold the question or the slash button. You could also just move the animation points if you want to do it easier than this. Great, so let's see how that sounds. Great, so that's kind of what I'm looking for. Now the problem, like I mentioned before with sends, is that when you're sending audio to another track within Pro Tools, it actually duplicates that audio and then sends that new audio to the reverb, which means that you still have the same amount of dry signal that you did before. And so in circumstances like this, where I wanted it to mostly be wet, you might actually have to turn down the dry signal so that you have a mostly reverbed audio clip. So to do that, let's actually close the send fader, and then let's open up the track fader like we did before, and then we'll actually have to lower the volume of this clip using our volume fader. And let me actually just add the automation down here so you can visually see me doing that as well. Great. So that's a common problem when you're using reverbs set up on sends and aux tracks, is that sometimes then you have to go back to your original clips and turn them down because you're duplicating the audio signal. So like before, I'm going to pull this automation all the way to the end of the clip. And to do that, I'll just add an automation point by holding Control, pull it down to, I think it was -8 dB, delete this other automation I have, and bam, now the audio is lowered for the entire clip. Great, so now that we added reverb to our group track, let's see how we can use reverb on the ADR to make the ADR match better with the dialogue recorded on set. So let's go back to our scene with Murphy and his wife, and let's go up to the ADR tracks. And in our EQ video, we worked on the EQ of these ADR tracks so that they would match the dialogue recorded on set. So now we need to add reverb to these clips. so that they match even closer. So for this, it looks like we're in a small room. So again, I'm going to use the verb A, send. So let's unmute it. Let's put the ADR1 into touch mode. I'm going to open it up again so we can see the automation on that send. And let's open up the volume fader of the send to see if we can match it.
No. Listen, look, I know.
It's been stressful lately.
Chief won't stop yelling at me.
Guys at work keep giving me.
Great. So it looks like I need about -17 dB. I'm going to move this forward because it took me a while to find that setting. And let's actually hear how that sounds.
No. Listen, look, I know.
It's been stressful lately.
Chief won't stop yelling at me.
Guys at work keep giving me.
So it sounds close, but it seems like the reverb I have on Reverb A still has too much decay than the actual production audio. So in this instance, let's actually add automation to our reverb to lower the decay on that plugin. So to do that, let's go down to our Dialogue Reverb A track. Let's open up the plugin and let's add the decay setting onto an automation line. So let's open up the auto button. Let's add decay so then we can automate that setting. And now the knobs turn green because it has an automation line. So then let's go over here to the left, open up the caret and open up that decay setting. And like I said before, currently it seems like the decay is still too long for this particular scene. So for this scene, I'm going to lower this decay setting. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit and find where that scene begins. Seems like it starts right here on the bag and it goes all the way until she walks away. And then I'm going to lower the decay so that it better matches the audio. So maybe something around 300. We'll have to try it out. So now let's go back to our ADR and see if that actually helps the clip.
No. Listen, look, I know.
It's been stressful lately.
Chief won't stop yelling at me.
Guys at work keep giving me.
Great, so that sounds a lot closer. And actually it sounds like I still have too much reverb. I'm gonna pull this down a little bit.
No. Listen, look, I know.
It's been stressful lately.
Chief won't stop yelling at me.
And with a little more finesse, we can get this ADR to sound pretty close to that dialogue that we recorded on set. Great, so those are the various ways that you can use reverb on the dialogue tracks. Now let's head down to the sound effects to see how we can use reverb on that family. So for sound effects, you generally use reverb for two different things. One, if you're trying to make the sound larger than life, or two, if you're using the sound effect to create this dreamy atmosphere. And that's exactly what we're gonna do in this example. So if you remember back to our sound effects tutorial, we did the sound effects of the detective and of Murphy getting out of the car. And so here's what it sounds like. So since this was shot in slow-mo, I wanted to make the sound effects sound larger than life and really have this kind of dreamy feel with them. So of course, when I sound designed it, I made the sound effects over the top, and now we're gonna add reverb to the sound effects to get that over the top type of feel. So since we're going for a dreamy atmosphere, I'm gonna use the larger reverb on these sound effects. So let me unmute verb B on all the different tracks. And then let's turn all of these tracks into touch mode by selecting them, Shift Alt, and then click on touch mode. And now let's turn up the volume of the send of every track that we want to send to the reverb plugin. So we're going to send this first track. Great, we'll do the next one. Next one. And so you get the point. So by adding reverb to these sound effects, we've achieved that dreamlike sound that we were looking for this small moment of the film. And now the sound really mimics what the visuals are doing when they film the shot in slow-mo. So that's a great example of using reverb on our sound effects track. Moving down to Foley. So similar to using reverb on the ADR tracks, you might also need to use reverb on your cleanly recorded Foley tracks to make the Foley match better to the production sound effects. So if we go back to our scene with Murphy and his wife, it looks like we have some Foley that was recorded of her box of stuff. Let's see how that sounds like.
No. No. Listen, look, I know.
It's been stressful.
So as you can hear, the box of stuff, they're kind of jingling and they're drawing too much attention. And so one way that you can make the audio draw less attention is obviously by lowering the volume, but also by using reverb. So let's use reverb on this clip right here. Unmute the Foley Verb A track, put it into touch mode, open up the send fader, and let's turn it on.
No. No. Listen, look, I know.
It's been stressful lately.
Chief won't stop yelling at me.
And probably what we could do too is just turn down that volume as well.
No. No. Listen, look, I know.
It's been stressful lately.
Perfect. So depending on how cleanly you recorded your Foley, you can use it on props, you can use it on our footsteps, and you can even use it on our clothing passes. So last but not least, let's go down to music. So like I said before, normally when I receive music from the composers, they're already mixed and they already have reverb printed inside the various stems that I receive. So generally, I don't really use reverb on my music tracks. However, when you're mixing the film, you may find different moments where you want the music to linger longer than the composer originally made it. And so that's actually one way that you can use reverb when you're mixing your film. So towards the end of the film, we have the large momentous moment when Murphy is finally proving himself. And so we have a large music swell to that final moment.
For those mistakes that make us human.
Now, when the composer wrote it, he didn't actually know how long the sequence was going to be. So as you can hear the music, it sounds fantastic. However, I kind of wanted to linger a little more as we delve into this slow-mo shot. So let's use reverb to do that. So I'm going to unmute the verb B on these various tracks here, music 8, 9, and 10. And then I'm going to raise the send volume right on this last note.
Make us human.
So I did it for the first track. And let's do it for the last track. And so although it's subtle, it helps bridge that moment from the buildup all the way to the slow-mo shot. So that's one way that you can use reverb on your music to help smooth over the different cuts in your film. So this completes this tutorial on reverb, so make sure you save your session. And just to recap, we made 8 new aux tracks so that we can add reverbs to our dialogue, our sound effects, our Foley, and our music families. Then we bussed our different families to the various aux tracks so then we could send audio to those tracks. Then we added a small reverb on verb A and then a larger reverb on verb B. Finally, after setting everything up, we went up to the dialogue track and added reverb to add depth or space to various clips. We also use reverb to make the group tracks fit into the scene, and we also use reverb on ADR tracks to match the production dialogue. Then we used the reverb on the sound effects to make the sound effects larger than life and to give them a kind of dreamy aspect. We added reverb onto the Foley tracks to make them again fit to the production sound effects. And then finally we used reverb on the music tracks to be able to smoothen over different cuts. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.